Thanks for having us today. Bob and I are very serious about this. We joke, we have our perspectives, we have our beliefs. How did Common Ground get started? Is this just a dog and pony show, a shtick that we do to entertain people and make exorbitant fees? No. It is something we're very serious about.
Certainly not here.
Speak for yourself.
Okay.
And try to stay awake this time. We were sitting in a green room, a room that is never green, I don't know why they call it that, and watching the usual patter that goes on, especially on cable TV. You have a host and you have two guests. One guest says to the other, "You're ruining America." And the other one responds, "No, you're ruining America." And he says, "Well, you're a fascist. Well, you're a commie. Well, you're a secular humanist. Well, you're a Bible-thumping bigot." And the host says, and we'll be back with more civil discussion after these messages. Real people don't behave like that. Most of us live in mixed neighborhoods of people of different ideological, religious, cultural, social beliefs. If you're living next door to somebody of a different perspective than yours, you don't get up in the morning at 7 o'clock, throw the window open and yell to your neighbor, "Hey, you no good rotten commie, what are you going to do to ruin the country today?" Most of you got kids going to the same school, maybe some of you go to the same church, you hang out at the PTA, social groups, or groups like this, and you don't card check everybody to make sure they're absolutely in line with everything you believe in. So Bob and I, who've been friends for many years, they thought, and we've contributed, by the way, to this polarization that is so rampant in America now. We said, no, wait a minute. What if we actually sat down and, as we respect each other, don't always agree, but could we find common ground on some of these issues without compromising our position? Let me read you something from the Observer yesterday. I don't know how many saw it. This is from a guy who writes for the Philadelphia Inquirer, whose name I can't pronounce, but I think it's Smerconish, Michael Smerconish. He's writing a piece based on a National Journal survey, and listen to this. This gets to the heart of what Bob and I believe. In analyzing votes cast in 2010, the National Journal concluded that the level of polarization was the highest in 3 decades of measurement. Now that's amazing. And Michael says that one of the reasons for this is the loss of individualism. We all now must see ourselves as members of groups, group think, group ideas. The whole idea of the individual is passing away. Now, we believe that common ground works best between people of strong convictions, but who put a principle and a policy even ahead of those convictions. I'm still a conservative, even while seeking common ground. Bob is still wrong. And when you start out on that premise, keep your hand gestures to yourself. I believe there are certain principles that always work and have proven themselves over the test of time. When I was growing up, you penalized the things you wanted less of and subsidized and encouraged the things you wanted more of. Now it seems to be reversed. We penalize and discourage the things we say we want more of and subsidize and encourage the things we say we want less of, and are then shocked to find we're getting more of what we want less of and less of what we want more of. Does this make sense? We didn't just crawl out of a cave. We don't have to invent the wheel. We don't have to discover fire and its uses. We have millennia of history. There are no ideas that are new. As Ecclesiastes says, there's nothing new under the sun. Why repeat the same errors? Why repeat the mistakes of the past? We know what works. Living within your means. Not getting into great debt works for the individual as well as government. I wish they'd try it for a change. We know that getting married before you have children is best for the married people and for the children. We know taking illegal drugs is bad for you. We know drinking to excess is bad. We know that a society that upholds a moral fiber and standards of right and wrong is best for that society. Why are we still debating these things? So Bob and I, in that context, left and right, liberal and conservative, we'll get into labels in a few minutes, which I think are unhelpful, we decided to sit down and try to negotiate based on our convictions what would, in the words of one of our great founding documents, promote the general welfare. Nobody seems interested in promoting the general welfare now. They seem interested only in promoting their own welfare, their party's welfare, their particular special interest welfare, not the general welfare. We think we can do that in the context of being a liberal and being a conservative. Bob?
You know, one advantage of being a liberal in a crowd like this is expectations for me are very low. Now that I'm not drooling yet, I suppose it's a surprise to most of you. You know, and I know what you think. You know, we're all a bunch of, you know, socialists, that we drive Volvos, we eat cheese and wine, and most of us are gay, and we're left-handed, and we're all that stuff. Now, let me tell you, I know what you expect about a liberal, but let me tell you my favorite expectation story. It's a true story. 1960, Jack Kennedy about wrapped up the Democratic nomination for president. And a certain state senator, a Democrat in Georgia, was going around the South saying, we can't nominate this guy. He's a Catholic. We can't have a Catholic on top of the ticket. We're going to get killed. Well, it got so bad, the Massachusetts State Democratic Party happened to be in convention that spring and invited the old boy up to bridge the differences. So they get him in a back room like they did with me here when Chuck took me back and said, Bob, this ain't necessarily your crowd, as if I didn't know that by the cars in the parking lot. Of course, I very rarely get picked up by a Jaguar in the morning, as I did with Chuck's car. That's okay, Chuck, but I know everybody knows that. And so they say to the old boy, now, Senator, out in that room, there's a lot of Irish Catholics. Out in that room, there's a lot of Italian Catholics. Out in that room, there's a lot of Portuguese Catholics. He said, I know now, you're worried about my anti-Catholic feeling. I'm not going to embarrass you. So he gets out there, and sure enough, he says, I want to say at the outset, I love Irish Catholics. I love Italian Catholics. I love Portuguese Catholics. It's them damn Roman Catholics I can't stand. So, you got to be a little careful to assume too many things. I happen to be a jobs liberal. My father was worked with Dr. King for many years, with Dr. King the day he was killed. But my father also was a working man, and he believed in work. And when I was on TV one night, the issue of the spotted owl came up. My old man called me after the show and says, what's this spotted owl thing? I said, well, it's an endangered species. It needs to go to new growth forest. He said, or old growth forest. He said, well, why don't we go to new forest? Probably more food. I said, no, it doesn't work that way, Pop. He said, well, how many jobs are involved? I said, about 25,000 guys will lose their jobs. 25,000 jobs and an owl? He said, give me my effing shotgun. I can handle that. So we're not all the same, as you might imagine. Now, what Cal said about common ground, let me tell you my feeling. I've been around Washington for 30 years. I've watched it go from bad to worse in many ways. And we decided to do this because we believe very, very, very sincerely that it has now become a dysfunctional entity. It does not work anymore. One of the reasons that it's so polarized is that everybody on the Republican side are a bunch of wingnuts, and everybody on the liberal side are a bunch of decent but left-wing people. I mean, they don't represent the majority of the American people. And the American people, when you ask them poll after poll, do you want these people to try to work together to get something done? They'll say yes. And these people can't even sit in the same room together. And here's the dirty little secret about it. They don't because ideologically they're too far apart, yes, but there's special interest groups in Washington, thousands upon thousands, that like the status quo. They don't want to see it changed. And what greases that? It's money. Let me give you a very frightening thought. If you're a newly elected senator this last year, in order to be competitive for your reelection in 6 years, you need to raise $5,000 every day for 6 years to be competitive. If you're a House member and you're going to run in 2 years, you need to raise about $1,500 a day, every day until you run for reelection. And who gets that money? Where does that money come from? Mostly from special interest groups who have an interest in keeping the status quo. And nothing's going to happen until and unless there's a price to be paid for not practicing common ground. Right now, nobody gets hurt if you don't practice common ground, except an interesting thing happened last week. The Coburn from Nebraska, correct? Oklahoma, one of those right-wingers out there.
The wind comes sweeping down the plate.
Yeah, and it should sweep out most of the Republicans, be fine. But Coburn and a Democrat from Virginia named Warner went around the country, and they're trying to work out a budget deal that includes entitlements. And everybody in Washington is so afraid of entitlements and dealing with them, which is really the heart of what this is about. We'll talk about that in a minute. But their poll numbers went up because they did that. They didn't go down. And the way we're going to deal with common ground, in the way it's going to finally work, it's not going to happen in Washington. It's going to happen when people who don't practice common ground, who don't get anything done, get defeated because they don't. And that's really our goal. I'm a politician, and I understand one thing that politicians understand, and that's votes. And if there's enough common ground votes out there, they're going to come around and do their job. Now, I'm going to end this section by saying that sometimes, you know, you got to be careful what you ask for. I know a lot of you in here probably want to see Barack Obama defeated in 2012. Let me just say, I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but you got to be careful what you ask for. You know, there was a story about these two brothers who died in a car wreck very young. And there was the older, though, more serious brother, Cal, and the younger, friskier brother, Bob. And they go to the pearly gates, and they say, St. Peter, this ain't fair. We shouldn't be dead. We're young. St. Peter said, I'm having a bad day too, boy, so I'll tell you what. You can go back there for 6 months, but you can't be human because you're dead. So what do you want to be? And Cal says, I want to be an eagle. Fine, you be an eagle. Bob, what do you want to be? I want to be a stud. I want to be a stud. All right, fine. 6 months go by, they don't come back. And he calls the angel Gabriel over and says, Gabe, go down and get those two brothers. Cal's not going to be hard to find. He's an eagle floating somewhere over the Golden Gate Bridge or the Grand Canyon. Bob's going to be a little bit more difficult because he's a 2x4 in a condominium someplace in New Mexico. I just say I'm liberal. I want to just say, Cal said why he was a conservative. I noticed all of you went, yeah. I'll tell you why I'm a liberal, and I'll tell you in about 3 sentences, because other than that, you'll fall asleep. And I don't expect to convert you here, but let me just put it this way. Last night, somewhere in West Charlotte, a child was born to a crack mother. Somewhere last night, probably in the southern part of this city where wealthier people live, a child was born to a white couple who were married. I don't believe that those two children have an equal shot at the American dream. It's not the baby's fault. The mother should not have had, the crack mother should not have had that baby. But it's not the baby's fault. And our responsibility, all of our responsibility, is that that child, until they're 18 years of age, have a right to decent housing, food, medical care, education, clothing, and a safe environment. And if their parent or parent cannot afford it, then who's going to pay for it? You're going to pay for it. And I'm going to pay for it. And certainly Cal's going to pay for it. Because in this country, I would like to be able to say that the American dream has been fulfilled and it's an equal playing field. For those two babies, it is not.
Why isn't this working? Why has Congress become so dysfunctional? There are a whole bunch of reasons. Bob touched on a very real one about the money. The money seems to be the official established religion in Washington. You can't get access unless you're contributing. You can't influence unless you're a lobbyist and pay a lot for the re-election campaign. We'll get into a solution for that in a moment. But there is something else that has been lost that I think is the key to why Congress has become so dysfunctional, no matter who's in charge. And that is a loss of personal relationships. There used to be these great party givers in Washington. They were all women. They were doyens of the city of Washington. They gave these fabulous parties where people of different political persuasions and parties and beliefs and backgrounds would come together and have dinner and talk to one another. Those are almost non-existent anymore. Washington is effectively segregated again in a political sense. There are Republican and Democrat restaurants. It's not legal. I mean, Republicans tend to eat at some restaurants, Democrats at some others. Nobody knows anybody anymore. The spouses mostly stay home. And for male members of Congress, as we've seen, this can provide special problems as they are engaged in certain activities with staffers and lobbyists and other things that ruin their careers and marriages. John Ensign, who is a handsome, strong candidate for higher office, senator from Nevada, has just announced he's not running for re-election. His career destroyed because of an affair. This is really bad because It used to be, before members came in on a Tuesday morning and left on a Thursday afternoon, after voting on legislation they hadn't read and making phone calls to raise that $5,000 or $1,500 a day, depending on whether they're in the House or Senate, that the spouses would be there, they would have congressional wives meetings and groups, and one of them would come home and say, oh, honey, the wife of Senator so-and-so I met today, and they're having struggles with their kid the way we are. Maybe we can get together and discuss this. All of that's gone. Everybody sees each other now as a label: Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, right-wing, left-wing. Nobody knows anybody anymore. And that is one of the reasons that things don't get done that benefit the most people. If you're only there to benefit yourself, if you're only there to perpetuate yourself in office, if you're only after the power game, who's in, who's out, you have an election, and then you spend the next 2 or 4 years trying your best to defeat the person who won the election. If you ignore the results of the election, as is happening in Wisconsin, Barack Obama said, when Democrats ran both houses of Congress and he occupies the White House, elections have consequences. Yes, they do. That means you shouldn't flee the legislature and stop doing your job simply because your party lost. Imagine if the Republicans had done that. But that's the kind of attitude now. It's all about the power. It's all about me. It's not about the country. And that's why Congress has become so dysfunctional. Bob?
I'm going to jump on this point about how the purpose of being in the House and the Senate, as Mitch McConnell, the minority leader of the Senate, said, was to defeat Barack Obama. Now, the 2012 election is coming very soon. And I look at this Republican bench, and I must say, it's strikingly exciting. There is Newt Gingrich, who is the only person I've ever met who's never had an unspoken thought. There is Pawlenty, when he travels around, Salmonex sales plummet. There is the head of Domino Pizza. Godfather Pizza. Doesn't matter. He makes pizza. And then waiting in the wings, there are some other people. Now, Sarah Palin and I are colleagues at Fox. When she did her contract with Fox, she asked specifically not to have to appear with me on television. And Fox said, well, he's our main Democratic analyst. You got to appear with him. And she said, well, he's not nice to me. And I saw her finally, and I said, I'm not nice to you. I just don't agree with you. You could be the nicest person in the world. I don't think so, but I didn't say that. But anybody that spends 22 hours in the darkness in the winter and whose husband drives 200 miles with a broken arm on a snowmobile has got some things to think about. But she has figured out a way to make a lot of money, but she's not running. And Mike Huckabee's not running. So it's going to come down to my old friend, Haley Barbour, who's the governor of Mississippi, maybe Mitch Daniels out of Indiana, and then there's Mitt Romney, who was the author of Obamacare. And that's something Republicans remind him of all the time. This is the first time Republicans have not had an heir apparent for their nomination. And they're running against Obama, who can be beaten. Now, I've defended Obama for the last 2 years on television. Some days I felt like the only fire hydrant at the Westminster Dog Show. It has been a rough road. Now, things are getting better, but it's dicey. He can be beaten, but in this crowd, I'm not sure I see by who, but I'll give this caution, and I caution the Democrats about this. Somebody will get the Republican nomination. And getting the nomination of a major political party lends itself to major stature in somebody. Somebody will be a big player come next July when they get that nomination. Mitt Romney, besides the Obamacare, probably is the guy that's the front runner, but he still has to explain the Mormon issue. Now, he didn't have to do that much last time around. And I don't know that many of you know about Mormonism. Maybe some Mormons in this room. I have nothing against Mormonism, but, some of the beliefs are a little different than some of the rest of us might have. And I think it's controversial, and I think it could hurt him. But on the other hand, I'm not sure who right now beats him. The Republicans want to beat Obama so badly, and yet they don't seem to be putting their best people forward. And I don't quite understand that. People have opted out of this race. There was a candidate that if I'd had him, I could have made him the best candidate you could possibly have, the guy by the name of Thune out of the Dakotas, North Dakota, right? South Dakota, one of those places. Yeah, I don't travel up that territory much, full of Republicans. But now, and by the way, I know you guys probably think that I'm just a doctrinaire Democrat. It is true. I've never voted for a Republican, ever. But I got to tell you why. When I was 13, my father took me into a voting booth to give me a civics lesson. And then you had two levers you pulled. One, all Democrats fell. One, all Republicans fell. And if you wanted to split your ticket, you had to read 13 pages in Hungarian to figure out how to do it. So my father says, son, you see that Democratic lever? I said, yeah. He said, you pull that, all good things are going to happen to you. Jobs, women, cars, money, anything you want. I said, no kidding. I said, what if I pull the Republican lever? He said, you're going to die. So every time I've ever gotten near a Republican, my hand sort of goes like this, and I can't quite do it. I would say that as I handicap that election, one of the problems the Republicans are going to have is that in their early states, the caucus goers in Iowa, the primary attendees in New Hampshire, and the primary attendees in South Carolina are way to the right of the mainstream Republicans. The mainstream Republicans, many of you who are represented in this room, have essentially abandoned your party to a group of people that are very far to the right and very far out of the mainstream of American thought. I've been to Tea Party demonstrations before, scared the hell out of me when I was down there, particularly when they recognized me. Then they chased me out of there. Now, I spend a lot of time with Sean Hannity. He's a very good friend. Matter of fact, he's one of my best friends. Now, Sean was dropped on his head as a youth, obviously, because his politics are so screwy, but even he will concede that some of these people are way off. And these are the people that are cutting these deals for $61 billion in cuts to 12% of the budget. We're going to talk about budget. We're going to talk about briefly the Middle East, and then we're going to end this, and we'll take your questions. So let me turn this over to Cal and talk about the budget for a second.
The deficit, the debt. Remember when that was an issue? Let's see now. That's when George W. Bush was president. And Democrats were saying, we cannot sustain this level of debt, which, as I recall, was less than half of what it is now, because it will be too great a burden to our children and grandchildren. Well, now that it's over $14 trillion, all of a sudden it's no big deal. What happened in the interim? Oh, President Obama, yes, of course. When I was growing up, I was taught by my parents two major economic lessons. My dad had said, always pay the bank on time, keep your credit up, and live within your means. Don't let your eyes get bigger than your stomach. If you can't afford it, don't buy it. One of the major contributions to the federal debt is the concept of entitlement. If I'm alive, if I'm breathing, I'm entitled to other people's money. You know, there's a commandment against that, but when the government does it, it's taxes, same result. What I'm entitled to is liberty and opportunity. The rest is up to me. Now, we are a compassionate nation. People who are handicapped, mentally, physically, people wounded in war, people who are legitimately poor through no fault of their own, we want to help. We want to help them. I want to help the poor, but I want to help them become unpoor. I don't want to sustain them in their poverty. That's the difference between most liberals and most conservatives. We had a war on poverty. One of the Democrat presidents I voted for was Lyndon Johnson, my first vote. I regretted it. Same with Jimmy Carter. Voted for him the first time. I regretted that too. My time up? Thank you very much.
No,
is this the bill for our room? Or
yeah, it is.
Okay.
Matter of fact, yeah.
Your lights are on. Oh. Where was I headed? You interrupted me.
That's anyway, exactly why I did that.
I know that you did. You do that all the time. Ronald Reagan used to say that we have a debt in Washington, not because the American people are taxed too little, but because their government spends too much. The whole entitlement mentality is ruining our country. The idea that if you have made the right decisions in your business, in your life, then you ought to be taxed and regulated to the point where you can no longer grow as a business or hire new people or develop new products. Whereas someone else who has not worked as hard as you, who has not risked capital, who has not lived by the principles you lived by, gets the benefit of your hard work and principled living. When I was growing up as a young reporter, I interviewed a lot of rich and famous people. I never envied them. I say, what's your life principles? What are the standards by which you live? Where did you go to school? What did you study? I might want to be like you someday. But now the attitude is, if you make $2 and I make $1, you owe me 50 cents to make it fair. That's robbery. Why do we penalize the successful and subsidize the unsuccessful? So that's how we've gotten to the debt. This is unsustainable. We cannot allow China, which Bob and I agree is probably a greater long-term threat than some of the other immediate ones we face right now. We cannot allow them to continue to be our banker. We cannot continue to rely on Middle East oil. Gaddafi has got billions socked away to hire rebels to fight to keep him in power. Where did he get all that money? From us and from the Europeans buying his oil. We need a program equivalent to John F. Kennedy's going to the moon by the end of the 60s to free ourselves from dependence on foreign oil. We know this must be done. Why can't we get it done? We could if we got the special interests and the politicians out of the way. But we've got to address the debt, and we've got to do it soon, or we are going to be in the deepest doo-doo we've ever been in our lives. Bob?
Let me say one thing about entitlements. We're not talking about the entitlements of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. We're going to talk about that in a second. But that is entitlements of people who are poor in America. There were several of us, myself included, who have over the years thought with the best intentions that we wanted to build on the Great Society, that we believed that if you had public housing, if you had aid to families with dependent children, if you did everything you could for poor people, that it would be helpful and bring them up out of poverty. We were wrong. We bred 3 generations of dependent people. We recognize that now. And it's incumbent upon us to undo it. But we have to undo it in a way that's not draconian, the way the Republicans in the House want to do it. You know, they came up with this $61 billion because they came out and campaigned on it, the Tea Party people. Now, the reasonable Republicans in the House wanted $35 billion. They said no, $61 billion. And among the, you know what happens if you do that? That's 12% of the budget is discretionary. Everybody keeps thinking about the budget as all these wasteful government spending and all the rest of that. You know what the budget is? It is overwhelmingly Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the national debt, defense, and then 12% of it is everything else. Cops, Border Patrol, air traffic control, it's all out of 12%. And that's where the Republicans cut. They didn't have the guts to step up to the plate on entitlements, and neither did Barack Obama. The fact of the matter is, when I was in the campaign business, we used to take entitlements and run them down your throat. We used to love to say Republicans want to kill Social Security. It got so bad, my mother used to call me every week before an election and say, I just turned on the news, they're going to cut my Social Security. And I said, Mom, if you go get all your friends, go down to the polling place on Tuesday, vote Democratic, then you're going to get your Social Security back. Fine, she did it. Now look, we learned how to demonize that, and everybody's afraid of it. Everybody's afraid of it. And the only way you're going to get that dealt with, because it is the only way to balance the budget. And first, I mean, I'm not so worried about all this debt as a lot of people are, but I'm not going to get into that. I mean, $14 trillion doesn't concern me all that much. By the way, I wonder how many of you could say to yourself honestly, besides worrying about your kids and your grandkids and all that, what was it about $14 trillion in debt this morning when you woke up that affected your business in any negative way? Not a single thing. Interest rates are not up. Matter of fact, they're lower than they've been in a long time. When debt gets into the business of interest rates and inflation, then it matters. This is a big economy. $14 trillion is not that much, but we've sold each other on the fact that spending is the big deal. So if we're going to do that, the only way we're going to do it is we've got to get after these entrenched entitlement programs. And on Social Security and Medicare, we're up against the biggest and strongest of all the special interests, and that's the AARP, of which Cal is a member. And the AARP represents 40-some million people, and every time you try to touch Social Security, they come down like just a load of bricks on everybody. You know, I mean, they come over with their canes and their wheelchairs and, you know, their excess prescription drug things they throw at you and stuff. You know, let them go and get the Blues Plate special. That's fine. You go to Florida if they want to. But one thing they've got to understand is that Social Security was never meant to be a retirement program. If you go back to the original debate, it was meant to be insurance for poor people who couldn't put away money and savings to make it in their elder years. All of a sudden, it's become an entitlement. And people are getting paid more money than they ever were put into it, many of them. Medicare. In Medicare now, with fee-for-service, we're now paying money. My mother, at 92, got a heart valve transplant for $90,000. I mean, at some point, we have got to start recognizing that we are supporting the welfare of the old at the expense of the prospects of the young. And that's something no politician wants to face up to, because then you get in the Sarah panels, death penalty. We're all going to get death panels. We're all going to sit around and decide who's going to die and who's not. That's not what we're talking about here. But the fact is, what we are doing by Social Security, particularly at the levels we're giving it, is we are supporting consumption and discouraging investments in growth. The United States used to be number one in a number of categories, particularly in education. And now we rank 15th, 17th, 20th around the world. The rest of the world is catching up, and they're competing with us. You know this. We still can compete against them, and we can beat them if we're reasonably willing to make some investments in the future. How did we get what we got as a great economy? It was the investment of things like the internet, which was a government program, not Al Gore's. Where did the chip come from? It came from the government. Where did some of the major breakthroughs in research and technology come from? From major universities with government grants. The idea that that's a waste of money is silly, short-sighted, and it's going to cost us our position as the greatest economic power in the world. We have to do away with welfare for not only some people at the lower end who should not be paid to not work, and for corporate welfare, of which there is much too much. Do you know this tax system that we have gives more exemptions than it raises in revenue? I happen to be one of the few liberals that are for a flat tax. I say do away with all exemptions. Now you're up against some very powerful lobbies, not the least of which are the real estate people. I'm sure that some of you in here don't fall into your coffee, all right? It's all right. You'll probably win for a while. But here's a new idea. Steve Forbes, who came up with the flat tax. Now, Steve, I spent a lot of time with Steve. It's the best time for me to get my nap during the course of the day. And only Steve, only a mother could love Steve. But he does have a very good idea with the flat tax. And here's what his new idea is, and I think it's right. Let's try the flat tax, and let's keep the current system. You choose whichever one you want. And I'll bet you after 5 years, people are going to opt for a 15% flat tax. And they're going to do away with the complicated tax code that we have. That's going to help us deal with a deficit that, as I say, I don't think is that important, but other people do. So let me also say that there are things that Cal and I agree on that we've found agreement on that Democrats and Republicans can't. We agree on, for example, that nuclear power, it's time for us to build nuclear power plants. We just ought to do it. The last one was done in '77, I think. We can do that. I grew up next to the first nuclear power plant in the United States, the Connecticut Yankee Power Plant in the Connecticut River. I used to swim there in the winter because it was warm water. Now, that's why a lot of people say I'm still a liberal in my mid-50s. But that's all right. But we can do it. It's safe. It is a way that has been proven technology and better. We need to do that, and alternative energy. And yes, we need to drill some more. We don't need to drill in Anwar, but we can drill in other areas. But we have got to not depend anymore on transit points, 2 of them, for our oil. One is the Suez Canal, which is a dangerous place and easily destroyed, and the other is the Strait of Hormuz, with the Iranians sitting there could block it in a matter of a day. Those days have got to end, and they've got to end sooner than later. We agree on school prayer. I see no reason, none, why my side finds it objectionable for people to say prayer in school if they want to say it. If you take a minute of silence in the course of the day, you want to pray, pray. You want to look at the girl in front of you, look at the girl in front of you. You want to do something else with it? You want to figure out odds on the football game? Do that. But we ought to be able to have the right, if you want to pray to your Lord and Savior, if that's your religious beliefs, which are mine and Cal's, then you ought to be able to do it. Now, I'm going to leave the one thing that, and also, by the way, on Iraq, both Cal and I agree that the Iraqis, I never agree with that war, I still don't, but at the minimum, I've never heard a thank you out of them. And secondly, they've got the second biggest oil reserves in the world. They ought to be paying the bills. I mean, we're bankrupting ourselves in Iraq, and what do? They lease their 2 major oil fields to who? The Russians and the Chinese. What the hell's that? We went in there and liberated them. We got an army there, and they're giving it to the Russians and the Chinese. Very simple. Surround it with tanks. Say you can't have it. It's ours.
There you go. Well, a lot in there I agree with. Now, the one thing Bob didn't mention that we both agree on, that I'll touch on briefly before we close and take your questions if you have any, is term limits. The founders never intended so-called public service to be a full-time profession. We had farmers, we had lawyers, we had business people coming to Washington to serve their country for a limited time and going home to real jobs. The story I love telling most about this, that I think really brings it home, is when my good friend, and he is my good friend, George McGovern, who, by the way, practiced family values a lot better than some of my conservative friends, married to the same woman for 56 years, or no, 56 years, pardon me. When he was defeated in the Reagan landslide of 1980, which defeated 5 liberal Democrat senators, or as we say on the right, those glory days, George had not done anything other than public service since coming back from World War II, where he served honorably in a very dangerous role. So he decided to do something totally different. He went up to Connecticut and bought an inn and tried to run it.
Have it on the table.
Well, after a couple of years, it went bankrupt.
Do you have your name tag on the table? Right here. No, I won't do that. No. Sorry.
That's all right. I just want to see what's going on.
We were setting up a date for next week if you want to know the truth.
To divert attention from the substance and the correctness of what is being said by the
I apologize.
speaker currently before you. So George went up and tried to run the inn, and it went bankrupt. The Wall Street Journal called him up, wanted to know what happened. And in the classic line that tells you everything you need to know about what the problem is in Washington, beyond all of the things we've talked about, George McGovern said, gee, if I'd known how difficult it was to run a business, I might have voted differently in the Senate. I rest my case. It doesn't take long to get out of touch. How many of you in your businesses can raise your own pay whenever you want? Well, maybe some of you can, but probably not too many.
What, are you kidding me?
How many?
They all can.
I must be doing well. He keeps interrupting me.
I'm sorry.
How many of you can get the government to pay for your own retirement? How many of you can get discount haircuts, free parking, and free medical care? You know, the only doctors other than Lawn Doctor that makes house calls anymore are doctors for the House and Senate. They can call somebody up and from Naval Medical or NIH, come down there and treat you right in your office on Capitol Hill. They don't live a life that most of us experience. So we need to recycle trash and Congress for the same reason, because each left in one place too long begins to emit a foul odor, okay? So that's that's a major reason why we need to do this. Thank you. Now, there's something I feel very strongly about, and that is the idea that because I have a particular position on a political issue, that means I love America more than Bob does. I'd like to get rid of this idea of the other side. Bob is not on the other side. The Taliban are on the other side, okay? The people who want to destroy us or on the other side. Bob is my fellow American. Bob is my friend. I've gotten to know him. This is another problem with Washington, as I touched on earlier. Nobody knows each other anymore except by labels. Bob's dad served in World War II, so did mine. I think he loves this country as much as I do, maybe more. It has nothing to do with his political position. This idea that one person or one party loves his or her country more than another because of their stand on political issues is a form of idolatry, I think. This really came home to me about 6 or 7 years ago when my wife and I made a trip I'd wanted to make for years to Normandy in France. It was a cold January day. I'll never forget it. There weren't a whole lot of people there. It was raining, and it was cold, and it was kind of a miserable day. But I wanted to stand on that beach, the Boys of Pointe du Hoc, that famous Reagan speech in '84. And then I wanted to go over to Omaha Beach, where one of my uncles was in D-Day and stormed ashore there with the Allied forces. I wanted to identify with them. I wanted to see again, as I see regularly driving by Arlington Cemetery, the cost of freedom. Freedom isn't the natural state of humankind. If it were, everybody would be free. It has to be fought for by every generation to be preserved, and sometimes within generations. But as I walked through the American cemetery and saw those grave markers, mostly crosses, some stars of David, and saw uniquely American names, Jones, Smith, Brown, a few with ethnic heritage, Rodriguez and Gonzalez, and I looked at their birth and death dates. Many of them 18, 19, 20 years old, a few sergeants who were 30. Most of them would never marry or have posterity of their own. They weren't fighting for Franklin Roosevelt and another term in office. They weren't fighting for the Democratic or Republican parties. They were fighting for an ideal. America has always been an idea in search of an ideal. We have failed in many areas, race relations being only one of the more obvious ones. But we're trying to make up for it. We're trying to pursue the ideal of the promise of our founding documents and our founding fathers. This idea is offensive to me, that if you're a conservative and a Republican, you somehow love America better than liberals and Democrats. I'd like to see that gotten away with. I'd like to see us begin to know each other better and to realize that we can learn from each other. I've learned a lot from Bob. He's one of my favorite political experts. He's honest in his polling. He tells me stuff that I would never know otherwise. I learned a lot about him as an individual, as a human being, his kids, his life. And that has caused me to love and appreciate him more than I did when I just saw him as a label, liberal, Democrat, whatever. I know him now. We travel together. And this is one of the major problems, not only in Washington, but in the country. We don't take the time to know each other and respect each other as fellow Americans. And folks, if we can't make this experiment work for another generation, this country is finished. We better start working on common ground soon, because as the slogan was in World War II, we really are all in this together.
I was against the war in Iraq when it started, and I'm against it now. But I have a right to be against it because I'm an American. That's my right to do that. I'm also very patriotic. I believe in my country. I'm also a recovering alcoholic. By the grace of God, I have stayed sober for 10 years. And there was a time about 5 years ago when I was in a very difficult place, very, very difficult. And I almost drank. Now, I was getting divorced. I was married to a professional golfer. And by the way, you do not know fear. You've seen a 2-iron at 2 in the morning in the hands of a professional golfer boy. Only Tiger Woods and I share that experience together. But I was in bad shape. And the first person to come to my aid was the man up here on the stage with me. Now, fortunately, I did not pick up a drink that day because I think I don't have another one of those left in me. If I drink again, I'm gone. If I drug again, I'm gone. But he didn't come to help me as a Democrat or as a Republican or a conservative. He didn't help a Democrat or a liberal. He came because he was my friend. And he saved me from what would have been, in my view, a wretched life, and not one that I would not have lived very long. Now, one of the things we've come to realize is that common ground is not going to start in Washington. They just don't get it. it's got to start here. And every place we go as we close, we ask you to do something. We ask you to find somebody that you don't agree with politically. And I'm sure you know a lot of them. And sit down with them and just listen to them. Let them listen to you. Don't get mad. May not be persuaded by them. They may not be persuaded by you. But agree to get up from the table agreeably to come back again for another discussion. Because if we elect people to the Congress of the United States, at a minimum, we should expect them to sit down and try to work things out. They won't come to the table. They won't even sit there. They have no right to be there. Democrats or Republicans. But it's got to start here. And you've got to start making it clear to politicians if they don't do their job, if they don't find common ground, and there's not an issue out there, if he and I can find agreement on things, and we are ideologically way apart, but if we can find agreement, they can find agreement on every single issue that's in front of them. If they have the courage to do it and not have to give up their convictions in the process, I might add. But it takes courage, it takes going against powerful special interests, and it takes an understanding of one thing. And that one thing is that all these special interests are hot air. It's one of the great secrets in Washington. They throw their weight around. They throw their money around. Do you think they're not going to give their money if you're chairman of a particular committee? They'll give you your money whether you vote against them or not. They don't have any great grassroots operations out there. They're paper tigers, most of them. And they need to be confronted because they run government. Your elected officials do not. When I came to Washington, there were 1,300 registered lobbyists. There are now 223,000 registered lobbyists in Washington. When I came to Washington, there may have been 15 or 20 interest groups. There's now 10,000. All of them forcing their interest on elected officials and making them believe that if they oppose them, they're going to hurt them at the polls. My message to them is if you oppose them and you get something done, the voters are going to reward you. Just give it a chance, because when that happens, when they start losing their jobs because they don't sit at the table as reasonable people, then common ground will sink in, but it depends on you. When we've left places, we've had people set up common ground chapters and talk to their congresswomen and congressmen and senators. But start in your neighborhood. Or maybe not in your neighborhood because you probably all agree with each other, but find another neighborhood that's not scary and sit down and see if you can't find some common ground on some things. And I'll bet you can. Because the one thing we have common ground in, and I want to say this, you've been a great audience. We speak to a lot of groups, and some of them, well, the farther Midwest you get, you don't want to speak to them in the morning, let me put it that way. And if you go to New Orleans, you definitely don't want to speak to them in the morning. But you've been a good and attentive audience, and Chuck and Jen and Ann, I want to thank you all very much for what you're inviting us here. And to tell you that in the end, I may be a liberal, but I'm an American first. I believe in the exceptionalism of this country. I believe I have a right to be a liberal. Just as Cal has a right to be a conservative, but I have a right as an American, I have a responsibility as an American to move us together as a community and find common ground solutions to common ground problems. If our representatives can't do that, then let's get rid of them. And let's start over if we have to. But we've got to do it. So we want to thank you very much for having us. You've been a great audience, and I very much appreciate it. Thank you.